Thank you, Dr. Govind, for inviting me to talk on this topic. Nutrition is a very neglected way of area into the intensive care unit as much as other aspects of mechanical ventilation or antibiotic policies or for planning up of a dialysis. But let's see and try how we try to achieve our goals as far as nutrition is concerned. And majority of the patients, if you see, are in a hypercatabolic state, and they are very prone for a rapid state of malnourishment if you don't feed the patients really early, right from admission. And all of you know that inadequate nutrition increases the morbidity, mortality, and also increases the length of hospital stay, as well as the cost factor also goes up. And if you really analyze the elderly patients, or those patients with respiratory disease, or those patients with malignancy, or those patients with inflammatory bowel disease, the chances of the incidences of malnourishment is quite high. It varies from almost about 50% to almost 80% as far as the malignancy patients or the inflammatory bowel disease patients are concerned. Now, we were assessing these patients with different kind of tools. We had the subjective global assessment which was available. We do have the indirect calorimetry, which is still the gold standard and which is one of the best ways to assess the caloric needs of the patients. We also have got certain softwares which are now available where the Nutrimon is available. We have got a different softwares where certain ventilations also tell you the expended amount of the energy, basic energy expenditure which is occurring along with mechanical ventilation, and they tell you the daily requirements of calories. Till the time we also were taking into consideration the MUST tool, the various other assessment tools were taken into consideration till we found out the Nutrix score, which was much more comfortable, much more easy to use, and this just took into basic simple parameters as to identifying the patients who are at a high risk of needing very aggressive nutrition support, and those are the patients where categorically you need to start nutrition support right from the start so as to avoid reduce the morbidity as well as mortality. They just took into consideration few parameters such as the age of the patients. They gave simple scoring parameters like we do for Apache or like we do for the scoring systems, and they took into consideration the age, the Apache 2 scoring systems, the SOFA, the various comorbidities were taken into consideration, the initial stress factor level, what we used to consider that this patient is going to be subjected for has got trauma, is on dialysis, all those stress factors were included as a comorbidities here into these levels. The days from the hospital to the ICU admissions were taken into consideration, and the interleukin 6 levels were measured. Mind you, the interleukin 6 levels were kept as a variable option. Certain hospitals do measure and certain hospitals cannot measure it because of the cost factor or lack of availability of the equipments. But they do not hamper as far as the planning of nutrition support, and they said that you can easily skip the interleukin level measurement and still you can find out the Nutrix score. The statistical model mainly showed that those patients who had a higher amount of a Nutrix score needed more aggressive nutrition support, and there was a higher amount of mortality into the group where these patients where the Nutrix score was on the higher side. And also they found out that those patients who had a longer, higher Nutrix score, they required prolonged mechanical ventilation. And thus Nutrix score was correlated with the mortality as well as the morbidity. And what happened with the group where the patients where the Nutrix score was on the lower side? That again become a question mark whether those patients had a higher mortality. No, these patients where the lower score was there, they said that they should definitely start optimizing the nutrition support as per the guidelines, and you should continue the nutrition support. And similarly to you monitor the various factors as far as the procalcitonin levels or your lactate levels. Similarly, at least if the patient is remaining stable, it's fine. But the minute if your patient worsens over a period of time, if the patient is not being intubated before, now he's intubated, now he needs ECMO, now he needs dialysis, the Nutrix score again needs to be recalculated, and then that recalculated levels also should then your nutrition goals and a nutrition caloric requirement should also change as much as you change your antibiotic policies, as much as you change your ventilatory policies. So the lower score people, you need to monitor very precisely and find out and try to optimize the nutrition goal as much as possible into there. Secondly, when they were useful, yes, they are very useful to plan studies. They also help you to design various nutrition models as far as when and how nutrition studies should be done. Yes, Nutrix score various softwares are also available where we tried to do it in my hospital where we developed a software we put about 700 patients and we calculated the Nutrix score. And yes, it really helped us as far as to control, to see the efficacy of delivery of nutrition support to the patients were much more better than what we were just doing it haphazardly without calculating of the Nutrix score. So the delivery systems of nutrition also change, and therefore they help you to design the studies and also to plan aggressive nutrition support. As I said, you need to feed the patients right from admission, and if you see that the calculated cumulative energy deficit, if the cumulative energy deficit is more than 10,000 kilocalories, the length of hospital stay, the morbidity, mortality also increases. The cumulative energy deficit is the deficit right from admission to the ICUs, and you must see that the cumulative energy deficit is less so as to reduce the morbidity and the mortality. That means you need to start feeding the patients right on admission and not after the patient has worsened or not if the patient is improving, and you must see that. Similarly, that was another study which also showed that they found that the cumulative energy balance of 8,000 kilocalories, so it has to be less cumulative energy deficit, and the demand and the supply gap always needs to be matched and has to be reduced so as to reduce morbidity. What happens if you don't feed the patients? If you find that if you don't feed the patients, yes, there will be poor wound healing, you will have the difficulty to wean the patients off sometimes, there will be impaired organ functions, there could be a compromised immune system which can give rise to secondary infections, multiple organ failure, and as much as you have to start optimizing the patients with early enteral nutrition support, and only if you find that these patients cannot achieve the calorie goals within 72 hours, that means if you cannot achieve 80% of the calorie goals within the first 72 hours, then you must consider to bridge the deficit of that deficit of calories with the help of partial parenteral nutrition support. And yes, there is also one area of specialized nutrition support where we will see that nowadays not much being considered, but where still it can be used. Not only into the ICUs we talk about, even ward, you have to see that the patient is being adequately fed, because there also it increases the morbidity as well as the mortality, and therefore feeding is much more better early, because the prevention is better than a pound of cure, rather than landing up with burst abdomens with undrained fistulas which are continuously being draining away. Sometimes you need to identify the patients who are also going to be fit for a pre-operative patients. This, mind you, as an intensivist, this is not related to an emergency surgery where there is a perforated peptic ulcer and you need to optimize. No, if you have a planned malignancy patient, if you need to give fitness, you really need to assess it with the help of the albumin levels. Yes, ideally a pre-albumin level, but the albumin levels, you also should see the patient clinically whether the patient has got deficiencies or whether other vitamins need to be seen. And sometimes if it's a planned surgery, if you find that the patient is really cachectic, if the patient is really malnourished, you need to optimize the patients with the help of nutrition support for a few days and then consider to take the patient up surgery, even if a surgery has to be delayed. Mind you, this what I'm talking about is a planned surgery, not a complicated, not a emergency surgery like a perforated DU or a perforated situation. The route is very important. Enteral is one of the best way, and you have to consider the nutrition prescription as much as we consider all other respiratory support, local wound care, infection support. And as I already said, yes, you need to see that the demand and the supply gap has to be very narrow, and the timing is very crucial, and therefore early feeding with enteral nutrition forms the key, so that you have to bridge the gap and reduce the demand versus supply gap, and the gap has to be minimal so as to have a less amount of cumulative calorie energy deficit so as to reduce the morbidity and the mortality. I won't go into the details of these, because all of you know that the enteral nutrition support is one of the best ways, and RISE-2 is one of the best, and the combinations of carbohydrates plus lipids, amino acids, electrolytes as well as trace elements should be considered as a part of a package whenever a nutrition support is being planned. Not just giving carbohydrates is going to be beneficial, not just giving lipids is going to be beneficial. Yes, sometimes lipids play a big role into giving nutrition support, and they are not bad nutrition support, because lipid itself give you about 9 kilocalories of energy, and sometimes you need to supplement patients with lipid, especially if you want volume restrictions to occur, if you want more calories to be given to the patient with less number of volume to be given. You have got a liver cirrhosis, you have got a patient who is fluid overloaded. If the patient is on dialysis or renal failure, you can't give much amount of fluids to the patient or much amount of 3-in-1 bags to the patient. Then yes, using certain lower quantity or lower quantity of intralipids or fluids or lipid solutions can be beneficial because they give more number of calories, and therefore you need to optimize them. How you should start off with? Proteins about 1 to 1.5 grams, all patients to be considered. Yes, there have been studies from Paul Wischmeyer or even from there, sometimes higher nutrition support in the form of 2 grams, or even he's gone up to 2.5 grams of per kg per day, especially into those patients with burns and polytrauma. But those patients where you don't have an indirect calorimetry, or those where you cannot calculate the exact requirements, you should start off with about 24 to 30 kilocalories per day. And definitely, as I said, a combination of glucose, lipid must be given for optimal results, and you need to supplement them with vitamins, minerals and trace elements. The glutamine and the fish oils or the immunomodulators, which have been considered earlier in 2006 and 2009 and 12, are no longer being considered now because they increase the chances of morbidity or the mortality because of the incidence of renal failure. The combination should be given with the help of enteral nutrition. It is much more easy, it is much more cheap, it is physiological, it preserves the gut mucosa, because if you don't use the gut, definitely over a period of time atrophy will occur, and this atrophy can give rise to bacterial translocation, and that has, therefore a gut needs to be given in order to avoid weight loss. Yes, mind you, if you don't feed the patients again, the weight loss is tremendous into the hypercatabolic state. You can use a muscle mass, and a muscle mass almost about 900 grams or to almost 1200 grams of muscle mass or weight can be lost in a day, especially if the patients have not been fed. And yes, monitoring can be done, and these have been studied with the help of seeing the thickness. The muscle thickness also goes down with the help of monitoring the tricep fold thickness or the thickness, so by means of seeing the muscle thickness with the help of ultrasound guided monitoring. The routes, you know, the oral, the nasogastric, nasojejunal feeding, percutaneous or jejunostomy. Definitely when planning about nutrition support as an intensivist, we should also plan the route in which the feeding of the patient needs to be considered. This is one area where I always stress, as an intensivist, you should always discuss with our surgeon colleagues that if the patient is going to go up for a major Whipple surgery, if the patient is going to go to the OT for a major pancreatic resection, definitely, or a major surgery or intestinal resection surgery, you must always discuss the route of feeding of the patient, especially in a post-operative patients, where sometimes if required you must discuss the road, that whether he should comes out of the OT with a feeding jejunostomy, or he comes out of the OT with a proper jejunal to a tube where it is being placed, especially in pancreatitis patients or there is a pyloric obstruction which is again being drained. Then you have to place the proper tube right from the OT so that you don't delay the feeding, especially into the post-operative patients, because again there we no longer wait as much as possible nowadays, that you wait for the flatus to pass, or you wait for the peristalsis to start, because again they say that if you don't feed the patients again in the post-operative patients early, yes, mind you, not immediately if required, so where you can bridge the gap with partial parenteral nutrition for a short period of time. But there again, you need to start with a jejunal feed, or a feeding jejunostomy needs to be planned so that you can start feeding the patients immediately in the post-operative patients. How you should feed your patients? Yeah, this is a simple diagrammatic. As much as possible, you should assess the patients with the help of Nutrix score. Once you assess Nutrix score, see that the patients can start off with enteral nutrition support, and you should give them a gastric challenge, and you give them a full strength challenge. Initially, we were seeing that the dietitians always used to start off with 50 ml, 100 ml, 150 ml. Nowadays, they recommend that as per the guidelines of 2018, which have come up, or 2016, 17 have come up, they say that you have to achieve 80% of the calorie goals within the first 72 hours. So within the first 72 hours, you have to achieve almost 80% of the calorie goals, and that's how you should try to optimize the patients. And when if the requirements are met, then fine. If the requirements are not met, this is where the use of partial parenteral nutrition support comes in, just to bridge the gap of the caloric deficit, so that the patient is not calorie deficit and doesn't go into a cumulative energy deficit so as to produce problems. In case if there is again a gastric residue, we have the habit of aspirating the feed. Yes, definitely if a large volume is coming up more than 350 or 400 cc's, yes, then you can hold the feed for that period of time, but this is not a indication to stop feeding the patients. It just means that you need to continue to feed the patients, reduce the rate of feeding by half, and use prokinetics in the form of either metoclopramide or in the form of erythromycin, and continue to feed the patients. Instead of giving a bolus feeds again, sometimes you can also change the feeding pattern from a bolus feeds to a continuous infusion also can be given, and that's how you should continue to feed the patients, as I said, with the help of pumps or give jejunal kind of feeding, and only if you cannot breach, then combine it with partial parenteral nutrition. So feeding protocols are much more easy. The feeding practices have changed. You really need to develop that prescription, and you really need to ensure and you monitor it as much as we monitor. I know that we all neglect it as much as we see we have got interest into antibiotics or ventilation, but we never see whether the dietitians should also spend time, or we as an intensive in the morning rounds at least should spend time whether the proper delivery of the nutrition support is being delivered to the patient, and are we achieving 80% of the caloric goal. I won't go into the details of how it should be fed. The more important is once you are hanging the feed, once you have prepared the feed, see that the hanging time is not more than 8 hours. The set needs to be changed every 24 hours. You need to monitor the electrolytes, the sugars, and irrigate the tubes before feeding and after feeding the tubes, and monitor the lutein labs and the LFTs and bi-weekly. And small intestines tolerate it much more intermittent, and so continuous feeding may be necessary with the help of feeding pumps or any other feeding routes which we have got. You have got the anti-gravity bags which are also available for feeding. The very few contraindications now initially were considered as contraindications. Some of these contraindications have also been changed into relative contraindications. Again, is peritonitis, intractable vomiting, severe diarrhea. And mind you, not all diarrheas are because of the feed itself. It could also be because of the pseudomembranous colitis, because of the long-standing patient who has been in ICU, who has been on antibiotics for a prolonged period of time. And this diarrhea could also be because of a gut hypoperfusion which really occurs. And there have been always that less appetite or the diarrhea is always related to the feed. So mind you need to rule out, see for whether excessive use of prokinetics also have been given, and those prokinetics can also precipitate an diarrhea, or the water sometimes which is being used, that also needs to be ruled out, and see that the water what you are using is much more sterile. There have been misconceptions, as I said, that absent peristalsis, vomiting, a GCS where you cannot feed the patients. But yes, as I said, that once you have to achieve the hemodynamic stability, and then definitely you can start feeding the patients, and you need not wait for the full bowels to start passing gases which are there. So who are the patients who will benefit just from a parenteral nutrition support? Mind you, the concept have changed, or the definitions have changed to a partial parenteral nutrition support, or those who have got abnormal gut functions, those who cannot consume the adequate amount of nutrients which are being given by the enteral feeding, those who are anticipated not to be able to eat for 5 days or more, or the prognosis mainly warrants that a very aggressive nutrition support needs to be given, and malnourished patients really need to be optimized for surgery at what we saw as one of the start for it. And mind you, as I always said, you have to see that you have to combine sometimes enteral and parenteral with the help of partial parenteral to achieve the goals. But remember, enteral nutrition is the root, and that is the mainly the key which is there. All patients, as per the guidelines, all patients who are expected not to be feeding on normal nutrition within 3 days should receive parenteral nutrition within the first, if contraindicated or if they are not tolerated. Again, the guidelines say that only if enteral nutrition is not tolerated, to bridge the gap, it should be considered. How a glucose level should be considered? Yes, there have been various papers, the intensive insulin therapy, the nice sugar level which came up. There have been different concepts as far as what the reasonable sugar level should be there. Mind you, there have also been thought that that total parenteral nutrition or nutrition support itself increases the sugar level. But mind you, it's not always the nutrition which increases the sugar level. There is a stress factor which is there, a release of anti-insulin hormones which are being released because of various sepsis or gut hypoperfusion. So they say a reasonable sugar level should be kept under control, and a reasonable sugar level is it was between about 140 to 150. The initial intensive insulin therapy suggested that, The initial intensive insulin therapy suggested it should be kept between 80 to 110, but over a period of time after the nice sugar levels, a sugar level between 140 to 150 is fair enough to achieve the target goals. Yes, using it, you cannot use insulin into a parenteral nutrition. Only what you can do is you can neutralize the 3-in-1 bag with the addition of short acting or rapid acting insulin. That is the only additive which can be done in order to neutralize it, and you can, depending upon the sugar level, you can neutralize the 3-in-1 bag. The recent advances which were there was the availability of the glutamine as well as the omega-3 fatty acids as pro-inflammatory, because they have been said that immunomodulators, they have also worked at the various cellular levels to reduce the integrity. They also improve the cellular function. They also act as increase the production of the heat shock proteins. And initially, into the past ISPEN guidelines, they were considered for all patients of major malignancy patients, or those patients where burns was there, trauma was there, and therefore as per the old 2006 guidelines we were considered, but nowadays in 2016 we do not consider those as per the 6 and 9, and the 2018 we no longer recommend the use of glutamine or fish oil into the nutrition support. Mind you, there is again a gray area which is still available. They still say that arginine, or those patients where initial glutamine levels were burns or polytrauma patients, they consider to use it. But mind you, as far as septic patients, as those patients with septic shock, those patients with multiple organ failure, those patients who have got renal failure, you no longer use glutamine or fish oil as a part of a routine treatment care for critically ill patients, and these have now been reduced and these have been removed from the guidelines which we will consider as far as that. So what do the evidence guidelines say which came up? The guidelines which again came up, some things I've already covered. They say that check for the gut functions, assess the nutrition score with the help of Nutri-Score, and therefore all patients must undergo Nutri-Score feeding. You definitely plan the nutrition support to achieve 80% of the caloric goals, so as to achieve the caloric goals within the first 72 hours. And if you cannot supplement them, then supplement them with the help of partial parenteral nutrition support till you can achieve the caloric goals. See that whenever you are starting nutrition support, see that you have achieved the hemodynamic stability, especially if the patient is there who is unstable, if the patient is being absolutely on a very high support of noradrenaline or vasopressors. You must see that most importantly, those patients who are being unstable, when you have defined that hemodynamic stability, they have achieved that whenever you have seen that initiation may be considered after complete fluid resuscitation, and only after you have achieved the hemodynamic stability. The hemodynamic stability is defined by the decreasing requirements of the vasopressors which they are mentioned as per the guidelines, and you also need to monitor these patients for the gastric residual volume, because there is amount of a gut hypoperfusion which can give rise to paralytic ileus, and those problems could occur. They again say that once they are fully resuscitable, you should start after hemodynamic stability has been achieved with enteral nutrition support, and try to achieve 80% of the caloric goals as per the requirements within the first 72 to 2 hours. Again, they have said that before initiating, all patients who have been hospitalized now must undergo screening with the help of Nutri-Score, so as to optimize which patients require more aggressive nutrition support needs to be given. What is the route of feeding? They have also suggested that the use enteral nutrition feeding who can be fed via the enteral route, and there is no significant difference in the efficacy of jejunal versus gastric feeding in the critically ill patients, and avoid additional parenteral nutrition support in patients who tolerate enteral nutrition. So enteral nutrition is the key, and the use of parenteral nutrition has really gone down, and only those patients where supplemental parenteral nutrition, that definition of parenteral nutrition has changed only to as a supplemental only in those patients where you cannot achieve 80% of the caloric goals. Again, enteral or parenteral, initially the guidelines in 2006-2009, they also said that enteral nutrition, they still continued with the statement in 2016 that again enteral nutrition is the key, and therefore you should continue to use enteral nutrition support. So should exclusively parenteral nutrition should be given? That was also a thought in 2006 and 2009, and that has still not been there. Still, a parenteral nutrition exclusively should not be considered, and they also increased the morbidity, and they maintained it into the 2016 guidelines also, which should be considered there. And different what needs, again what you have suggested, how and how it feeding, again they have said that you should start feeding the patients with standard polymeric formula when initiating, rather than having kitchen feeds or home feed, because the osmolarity of the home feeds are not known. You exactly don't know what is the calorie content of the home feed, and even the microbiological analysis which is being suggested that there is an increased chances of microbiological flora into the home feeds or the kitchen feed, and therefore standard commercially available formulas are one of the best ways to feed the patients, and they have suggested that therefore these should be considered. And mind you, very important, a very small thing, whenever you are planning a nutrition support, you should really consider the scoops which are there, which are available, or which have been given by the companies. The scoop, all the nutrition should be calculated depending upon the number of scoops per feed, and not by teaspoons or tablespoons. The scoop is a measure for delivery or for calculating it. How it should be given, as I told you, indirect calorimetry is the best, but you can start off where those patients who don't have indirect calorimetry, you can start off with 25 to 30 kilocalories. Nutri-Score should be considered into all patients. All patients you should consider to use mainly an enteral route of nutrition support should be given, including those patients with trauma, burns, or those patients with major surgery. A very aggressive nutrition support needs to be given. Again, they have recommended that infusion diverted into the lower gastrointestinal tract in those patients with a high risk of aspirations, and based on the consensus what is there, we suggest that in most critical it is acceptable to initiate enteral nutrition into the stomach. As far as the volume guidelines, there are no specific guidelines as to how much amount of volume should be started, but you have to achieve 80% of the calorie goals which is there. Does the amount of protein be provided make a difference? They have suggested that sufficient high dose of protein should be considered, and you have to start off with 1.2 to 2 grams of per kg actual body weight per day may be given, and in certain studies the provision of proteins is more likely to improve the outcomes into those patients. How much amount? There is no general amount of recommendations as to be adjusted. What should be the progression course of the disease of the gastrointestinal tolerance, and this is usually the starting same calorie requirements what have been there. Monitoring again the passage of flatus, you should look for distension, see for radiological confirmations and the absence of pain, see for refeeding syndrome, see for diarrhea, and as I said, diarrhea not every time is because of the feed, it could be because of a pseudomembranous colitis or also because of excessive antibiotics or prokinetics what you have been using. Is there any specific formulas which are available? Yes, there are specific formulas which are available into medical ICUs or for surgical ICUs, and disease specifics and severe fluid restriction formulas may rarely be used into certain percentage of cases, but they should not be used as randomly for all patients who are into medical and surgical patients. You have to use them very judiciously into very specific conditions where you need to consider. Immunomodulations, I have told you, are out, and you no longer recommend using immunomodulators as far as the guidelines are concerned, and they have no longer be recommended. You have got small peptides or the soluble fiber peptides which are available, and they have been considered for there only if there is evidence of a persistence of diarrhea. Just because to avoid diarrhea, please don't start feeding the patients with the help of peptide based preparations, and we suggest that the small peptide formulations in patients only if there is a persistence of diarrhea or there is a persistence of malabsorption is suspected, and if there is no lack of response to the fiber, it should be considered. So you have to reserve it only for those patients where you have defined diarrhea and we have defined that there is a malabsorption which is there, and not all patients should be given. Or fermentable solution factors or the fructooligosaccharides solutions, these again should be given into divided in those patients only if there is evidence of a therapy for diarrhea, and this again should not be used prophylactically into those patients. All patients, again, you have to consider to use them with antioxidants, including vitamin C and trace elements, selenium, copper, and zinc, because over a period of time, critically they can precipitate a critical care neuropathy, and those patients require mechanical ventilation for a long period of time. That can be also one of the sources of delayed weaning or causes of delayed weaning which is there. So you have to supplement all these patients with adjuvant therapy apart from the macronutrients such as proteins, carbohydrates, and nutrients. So the take home message is assess all your patients, start enteral nutrition support as much as possible, use only partial parenteral nutrition as partial nutrition only if you cannot achieve the calorie goals, and supplement them with micronutrients along with the micronutrients to reduce the morbidity and the mortality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.